So let's talk about vintage guitars. What's the hype? Why do they cost so much money? And is it worth the money? And the reason I'm making this video is because last week I had the opportunity, which I'm still kind of pinching myself about, I had the opportunity to play a 1959 Gibson. Yeah, that's right. So anyone who's familiar with guitar might have heard the term bursts when referring to vintage Gibsons. The bursts were Gibson Les Pauls made between the years 1958 and 1960. It's kind of like the golden era for Gibson guitars. And some of the prices for the bursts are pretty astronomical these days, and they only seem to be going up. And having the opportunity to play a Gibson made, during the same era, probably in a similar factory using similar construction processes and materials, having an opportunity to play a guitar of that legacy is just something that is really special and definitely isn't something that I'm taking for granted. I know how lucky I am. So if you've never played a vintage guitar before, then what's the hype? What can you expect? And why do all the pros always lean towards vintage instruments? And this week when I played this 1959 Gibson, suddenly it all made complete sense. Now, I've owned Gibsons in the past, modern Gibsons, I play Strats and Tellys as you've seen on this channel, but all of my guitars are fairly modern. And vintage guitars, especially of that age, just feel completely different. The tactile feeling of playing a guitar of that age is definitely the thing that is most apparent. It just feels so unlike any other modern day guitar because the wood is aged, the manufacturing processes were clearly slightly different, and from the Gibson that I played, the 1959 ES-225, the neck was really slim, it was really thin, really comfortable, and completely different to what I was expecting from a Gibson made guitar during that era. Now, broadly speaking, if this vintage Gibson is anything like the wider array of vintage guitars out there, then there's just a definite resonance that is unlike anything else. And I think that's probably due to the finishing processes that they would have used back in the day for coating the tops of these guitars. These days you have nitrocellulose and polyurethane and so many finishes that are normally quite thick, and they're there to protect the actual body itself from any damage. But it seems like back in the day, those finishing processes were a lot less drastic, they were a lot thinner, and that Gibson just had so much resonance to it. It sustained, it had a real clarity, and it was really lightweight, and all of these things just make it an incredibly comfortable instrument to play. You've probably heard people say, well, they just don't make them like they used to. And I think in the world of guitar, that is definitely true. That is definitely the reason why vintage guitars demand such high value, because there really is a difference in the way that they are constructed, and the playability is one thing, and that's definitely something that the pro players are going to want to lean towards, because if you have a guitar that just feels worn in and isn't really obstructed by any, quality issues that you might find today, all of those things, when you put them together, just make for truly special instruments. And it's why, for me personally, it's kind of flicked a switch for me in terms of how I perceive guitars, because before this week I hadn't really come into contact with too many vintage instruments, especially not vintage instruments from the well-known manufacturers such as Gibson and Fender, and really kind of having this experience is changing the way that I perceive guitar and what I will be looking for in the future in regards to new instruments that I might want to acquire. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to save up my shekels and hope to buy a 1959 Gibson Les Paul, because, money doesn't grow on trees, and I think the availability of those guitars when I get around to ever owning one, which is probably never going to happen, is just not going to be an achievable thing. But there are definitely vintage guitars on the market that are going to be more accessible. You won't have to spend a ridiculous amount of extra money to obtain a vintage example of a great guitar. And I think just because of the playability experience and just how comfortable I felt on that vintage Gibson, it's definitely something that I want to pursue in terms of my collecting moving forward. I would love to have a vintage guitar in my collection. It's probably not something that I would take on the road, but for recording sessions and for just having a guitar to enjoy at home, I think having a vintage piece in the collection is just going to be a really special thing. So this video wasn't designed to be a platform for me to brag about my experience. Far from that, I'm not that kind of person. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who are interested in vintage guitars and have probably never had the opportunity to play one that might be interested in knowing how they actually feel and what's the sound like, what is the comparison against new guitars, and I just wanted to explain that in this video just to, you know, provide some insight to anyone who is interested. As always guys, thank you so much for checking out this video, and stay tuned for another video next Tuesday. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon to get notified when my video goes live next week. And if you did enjoy this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. As always guys, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time.